It was the kind of night that feels like the world is holding its breath. The kind where even the wind seems afraid to stir, and the sky above Black Hollow is a dull bruise of purple, hanging too low, pressing down on everything beneath it. I stood at the edge of town, staring at the horizon, where a flicker of light caught my eye. Something wrong. A shimmer, like a candle in the distance, teasing me. I thought for a moment that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. It wouldn't have been the first time. But then the light came again. At first, it was nothing more than a flicker, brief and fleeting, just enough to make my pulse quicken. Then the ground beneath me trembled. A soft vibration, almost imperceptible at first. But it grew stronger, louder, until it felt like the very earth was shaking underfoot. I didn't know what was happening. Then it appeared, the carnival. In the blink of an eye, it rose from the ground, twisting into existence as if it had always been there, hiding just beneath the surface. The lights exploded into life, too bright, too garish, flashing and flickering as they cut through the blackness of the night. Red, yellow, purple, twisting colors that had no business existing together. And the sounds, oh God, the sounds. Laughter, but not the kind that brings warmth to your heart. This was high-pitched, jagged, endless. It scratched at your soul, like fingernails against glass. Music played from somewhere deep within the carnival. It wasn't the cheerful melody of a fairground. It was distorted, like a lullaby played backwards, off-key and unnerving. I could smell it, too. A sweetness, thick in the air. Burnt sugar, yes, but something else. Something metallic, sharp, and foul. It made my stomach churn, but still, I couldn't stop myself from walking toward it. I don't know why I didn't turn back. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the hope I had buried deep inside me, a hope I hadn't even realized was still there. Hope for what? Redemption? Escape? It didn't matter, something was pulling me in. I crossed under the iron gates, feeling the chill seep into my bones immediately. The temperature dropped so fast that I almost thought I could see my breath in the air. The night, which had been so still moments before, was now alive with the sounds of something that shouldn't have been there. The carnival. It wasn't just an attraction, it was something else. Something alive. The tents loomed over me, impossibly tall and twisted, their tops frayed like old rags. And the people. Figures moved between the stalls, but they weren't like anyone I had ever seen. They didn't speak, they didn't blink. They just wandered, their eyes too bright, too fixed, their movements slow and mechanical, like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. I wanted to run, to turn back, but my feet wouldn't listen. I couldn't look away. The deeper I walked into the carnival, the more wrong everything felt. The lights flickered, sometimes too bright, sometimes dimming to the point where I could barely see. The sounds echoed through the air, sharp bursts of noise that seemed to come from all directions, and the smell. It was almost suffocating now, like I was breathing in something tainted. I tried to ignore it, tried to push through the unease gnawing at my gut. And then I saw him, the ringmaster. He stood at the heart of the carnival, his figure cutting through the chaos like a knife. He was tall, unnaturally tall, and dressed in a crimson coat that seemed to shimmer with an eerie glow, embroidered with strange symbols that danced in the flickering light. His face was impossibly smooth, like a marble statue, with eyes that gleamed an unnatural gold, too bright and too empty. His smile, it was too wide to be real. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth and deep, curling around me like smoke. "Welcome to the carnival of cursed wishes." I couldn't move. His voice wrapped around me like a vice, and everything else, The lights, the noise, the bizarre figures faded away. It was just me and him standing in the center of the madness. I didn't come here to, I began to say, but the words died in my throat. I wasn't sure why I had come, but something inside me had pulled me to him. The ringmaster tilted his head, as though studying me, his smile never faltering. "Ah, but you didn't you? You've come for a wish." His voice was almost mocking now, as if he already knew what I wanted, before I even spoke the words. I took a step back, trying to swallow the fear that crept into my throat, but the words tumbled out before I could stop them. I want redemption," I said, almost ashamed of the desperation that leaked into my voice. "I want to make things right." He smiled again, wider this time, his eyes gleaming with an almost predatory delight. "Ah, redemption," he mused, his voice trailing off. "How charming, how noble. You shall have it, of course, but as with all things in this world, there is a price. A price." I felt a cold sweat break out along my spine. Before I could respond, the air shifted. A figure stepped from the shadows. She was beautiful, in a way that made you forget to breathe. A woman with skin like porcelain and hair black as midnight. She moved like a dream, graceful, impossibly fluid. It was only when she got closer that I saw it, the despair in her eyes. Her name was Cassie. The ringmaster introduced her with a voice like velvet, but there was no joy in her presence. She was an acrobat, I was told, once the star of the carnival, until she too had made a wish. Now she was his, bound by the same twisted magic that ran through every corner of this place. She stepped forward, climbing a pole with an ease that was almost otherworldly. As she twirled in the air, my breath caught in my throat. She was beautiful, too beautiful. But something was wrong. It wasn't just the hollow look in her eyes or the unnatural way she moved. It was the way the air around her seemed to bend, like she was caught in a loop. Then, without warning, she fell. It was supposed to be graceful, but it wasn't. Her body jerked unnaturally, like a puppet with its strings cut, and she slammed into the ground with a sickening crack. The earth around her cracked open, and something dark, something slick and viscous, began to ooze from the seams in the dirt, creeping toward her. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. "Help me." Cassie's voice was barely a whisper as she sank into the ground, her eyes pleading. I reached for her, but my hands passed right through her, like she wasn't even there, like she was a shadow, fading in the dark. The ringmaster watched, his smile never leaving his face. "She is one of many," he said softly, "bound to this place forever. And so, my dear Theo, will you be. For a small price, of course." The carnival was no longer just a place. It was a trap. And I had just stepped into it. I hadn't planned on being here, honestly. I don't think anyone ever plans on it. It's like the carnival. It just appears when you least expect it. It lures you in, and before you know it, you're standing in front of the ringmaster, staring into eyes that know everything about you, about your deepest, darkest desires. And suddenly, you realize you've made a terrible mistake. I wish I could say I didn't know what I was walking into, but I did. Somewhere, deep in my gut, I knew exactly what this place was, what it did, and yet I still walked through those gates, pulled by a force I couldn't understand, something bigger than myself. The carnival wasn't like any I had seen before. It wasn't some temporary escape with popcorn and cotton candy. No, this place was different. It thrummed with an energy, something ancient, something that didn't belong in the world. It felt alive. And the moment I stepped inside, I knew it had been waiting for me. I didn't know what I expected to find, but it sure as hell wasn't him. The ringmaster. At first glance, he looked like any other performer. A man dressed in a bright crimson coat, taller than most, with a gleaming smile that stretched across his face like a scar. He was standing at the heart of the carnival, surrounded by twisting tents that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. His eyes, they were too bright, too cold, flickered with something dark, something that made my skin crawl. And yet, when he spoke, his voice was smooth, too smooth, like honey dripping from a knife. "Welcome, dear patron," he said, his words sliding through the air like silk. "Welcome to the carnival of cursed wishes." I tried to say something, anything, but I couldn't. His voice had a way of wrapping around me, squeezing the air from my lungs. He didn't even seem to notice my hesitation. He didn't need to. "You've come for something," he continued, his smile never faltering. "Something that pulls at you, gnawing away at your soul, isn't it? A wish, perhaps? A wish that could erase the pain, the regrets. A wish that could make everything right again." I wanted to scream at him, to ask how he knew, but I couldn't. He was right. Every word he spoke was true. I was here for one reason, to undo the damage I had done, to somehow find redemption for a past that had destroyed me. His eyes gleamed. "A wish, yes?" he asked, leaning in closer, his voice like the caress of a serpent. "But a wish, my dear friend, always comes with a price, and that price, no matter how small it seems, is never truly paid in full. Not at first. No. The price grows, like a seed planted in the soil of your soul, and in the end, it consumes you." My heart pounded in my chest. My throat felt dry as sandpaper. I wanted to say no, to turn around and run, but something in his gaze held me, pinned me in place like a fly caught in a web. "What's the cost?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper, but somehow I knew I had already stepped too far to back out now. He smiled, that damned smile that spread too wide, too eager. "A small sacrifice," he replied, his tone so sweet, so insidious. "Just a piece of you, a piece of your soul given freely, in exchange for the life you long for. What is one small piece when you can have everything?" Everything. The word haunted me. The promise was so sweet, so tempting. I could feel my body moving before I even realized what was happening, my feet carrying me closer to him, closer to the temptation of something better, something I could never reach on my own. He stepped aside, and that's when I saw her, Cassie. She glided forward from the shadows, her movements so graceful they almost didn't seem real. She was beautiful, no doubt about that, but it wasn't her beauty that froze me. It was the emptiness in her eyes, the hollow void that stared back at me like a mirror to my own soul. Her skin was as pale as the moon, and her hair hung down in perfect black waves. She moved as if she was floating, not walking, like she was caught in some ethereal dance. She reached up to a pole, climbing it with unnatural speed, twisting her body in ways that should have been impossible. But as she came back down, her descent wasn't graceful. It wasn't a fall. It was wrong. The air shifted, and for a split second I thought I saw the ground crack beneath her feet. The world slowed. Her body jerked unnaturally, her limbs twisting in a grotesque, inhuman way before she slammed into the dirt below, the sound of bones snapping too loud in the eerie silence of the carnival. But it wasn't just the fall that made my stomach twist. It was the way the earth itself seemed to open for her, splitting wide like a wound. From the crack spilled something dark and thick, a viscous liquid that moved toward her like a sentient thing, pulling her into the earth, devouring her. She screamed, or at least I think she did. It was more like a sound being torn from her throat, an endless cry that echoed in the space between the tents. Cassie!" I yelled, my voice raw, but I couldn't move, I couldn't help her. I reached out, but it was like my hand passed through her as though she wasn't even there, as though she was already gone. The ringmaster's voice cut through the horror, smooth as silk, cutting through the night. "She wanted freedom, just like you," he said, stepping closer to me, his eyes glimmering with malicious glee. "She made her wish, and now she performs for eternity. She's free, but she's never truly free. She's bound, just as you will be if you make the same choice." I wanted to scream, to run, to turn my back and never look at this place again. But something inside me, the part of me that was desperate, that was so lost and broken, held me in place. "And the price?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The ringmaster's smile never wavered. "A small sacrifice," he repeated, each word dripping with venom. "A small piece of you, given freely, and in exchange, everything." I felt the weight of his words press down on me, suffocating me. I had come here for redemption, for a second chance, but what would it cost? How much of me would I lose to get what I wanted? Would I be like Cassie, trapped forever, performing the same dance for an eternity? But the ringmaster was waiting, watching, his eyes gleaming with that same twisted promise. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that I was already too far gone to turn back. I was about to make a choice I couldn't undo. I wish I could say I didn't know what was coming, that I wasn't already aware of the kind of place this carnival was. But standing there in the shadow of the ringmaster and watching Cassie, God watching her, I couldn't deny it. I knew. Somewhere deep inside, I had known what the price would be, but I wasn't ready for this. No one could be. Cassie moved with a kind of grace that didn't seem real. Her skin, so pale it looked like it belonged to someone who had never seen the sun, gleamed under the flickering carnival lights. Her hair, black, like the void itself, flowed down her back in waves of silk. She looked like something straight out of a dream, too beautiful, too haunting to belong to this world. But as she twirled on the pole, her eyes, those cold, empty eyes, told a different story. There was nothing there, nothing but an endless, hollow sadness. I couldn't take my eyes off her. She was perfect, but not in the way a human should be. No, there was something wrong in the way she moved. Something unnatural. Something twisted, like she was a puppet whose strings were being pulled by something far darker than fate. And then, as she spun, I saw it. The change. It started subtle at first. A shift in her posture, a small crack in her fluidity, as though the rhythm of her performance had slipped just slightly off course. But then, as she came down, something snapped. It was like watching a marionette's strings be cut. Her body jerked, twisted, in ways no human body should. The graceful fall she'd been performing so effortlessly became a violent drop, a jagged, unnatural motion. I saw her legs bend at angles they shouldn't have, and her arms flailed in panic, but there was no control. It wasn't a fall, it was a violent collapse. The sound was sickening. A wet crack as her body hit the ground, but it wasn't just her body that cracked. The earth beneath her, this hard, solid ground, split open, as if the land itself had been waiting for her, eager to consume her. And from the cracks, something dark began to spill out. It wasn't water, not like I'd imagined. No, it was thicker, darker, alive, it seemed. The liquid poured out like tar, slow and deliberate, creeping toward her, as if it had a mind of its own. It coiled around her feet, like fingers wrapping around an ankle, tugging her into the earth. I tried to move, to shout, to do anything, but I couldn't. My body was frozen in place. It felt like my bones were made of stone. I could only watch as Cassie was pulled into the ground, her body sinking into the dark, viscous liquid. She struggled, her limbs jerking as she tried to push herself free, but the more she fought, the faster the black liquid consumed her. "Help me!" Her voice was faint, barely a whisper, but it was a sound that drilled straight into my chest. Her hands reached toward me, her fingers stretching out, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move toward her. It was like something was holding me back, like an invisible force was keeping me from reaching her. Her eyes locked with mine for a second, and in them, I saw something that stopped my heart. There was no fear in her eyes, no panic, just a deep, resigned sorrow, like she had known this moment would come all along, like she had known from the very beginning that the price for her freedom would be this. Her body twisted again, but it wasn't her, it was the carnival itself, the curse that had bound her, that had taken her soul long ago. Her eyes closed as the black liquid rose around her, swallowing her whole. She was gone. Just like that. The ground sealed itself back up as if she had never existed. The dark liquid receded into the earth, leaving nothing behind but the faintest ripples in the dirt. And there I stood, shaking, breathing hard, my chest tight with a cold, horrible truth. She had been taken. The price of her wish had been her soul. The price of her freedom had been her very life. I couldn't understand what had happened. My mind refused to accept it. How could something so beautiful, so full of grace, end like that? How could someone so alive be consumed by something so dark? But as the ringmaster's voice echoed in the distance, cold and calm, I understood. "Cassie was once like you," the ringmaster said, his tone almost sympathetic. "She wanted freedom just like you do. She wanted to escape her curse, and so she made a wish." A wish? "Now," he continued, his eyes glinting with amusement, "she is free. Free to perform forever. For all eternity, her soul is bound to the carnival. And that, my dear friend, is the price of freedom." I couldn't speak. My throat was too dry, my breath too shallow. It was like I had been punched in the gut, and the air had been knocked out of me. I had been watching. I had seen the cost of Cassie's wish, and now, standing here, looking at the spot where she had disappeared, I knew that I was no different than she had been. Just another soul desperate enough to make a deal with the devil, willing to give anything, everything, for the chance to fix what I had broken. But I wasn't sure if I could handle the price. And as I stood there, trembling, unable to tear my eyes from the place where Cassie had once been, I realized something. I was already too far gone. The ringmaster smiled, and I knew that he had won. The carnival had claimed me too. I don't know why it took me so long to see him. Maybe it was the chaos, the twisted nature of everything around me. Or maybe I was too lost in the horror of what I had just witnessed. Cassie's disappearance, the dark liquid swallowing her whole. But when I finally noticed him, I couldn't ignore him. He appeared from nowhere. 1 second, the carnival was swirling with strange noises and lights, and the next, there he was, the jester. His presence cut through the air like a cold breeze. He wasn't like the others, those who had become part of this sick, twisted carnival. He wasn't bound by the same rules. No, Jax was something else, something darker. He was tall but wiry, his movements so fluid they almost seemed unnatural. He wore mismatched clothing, the kind that made no sense together, like someone had just thrown scraps of fabric together in a hurry. His face was painted white, with grotesque streaks of black and red that twisted into a jagged, unnatural grin. His eyes, though, were what kept me rooted to the spot. They were wide, almost unnaturally so, and they gleamed with something that made my skin crawl. There was something wrong about him. something that told me he wasn't just a performer in the carnival. He was the chaos itself. When he saw me, he didn't hesitate. He just stopped, dead in his tracks, and his grin widened. I froze. He wasn't just looking at me, he was seeing me. Like he could look into my soul and find the cracks, the things I had buried deep inside. Looking for answers, aren't you? His voice was light, too light, like it belonged to someone who didn't care if the world burned around him. His laugh followed, high-pitched, sharp. It didn't sound right, like nails scraping against a chalkboard. It crawled under my skin. You think you can make sense of this place, don't you? You think there's a way out, a way to fix what's broken inside of you. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. My heart hammered in my chest, and my legs felt like they might give out from under me. The way he was looking at me, it wasn't the same as the ringmaster. No, this was different. Jax wasn't just part of the carnival. He was the wild card, the one thing you couldn't predict, the one thing you couldn't control. I stammered, but he cut me off with a snap of his fingers, his grin never faltering. Oh, it's not what you think. It's not redemption you're after, he said, leaning in closer, his voice dropping into something low, almost conspiratorial. It's escape, isn't it? You want to get out of this nightmare, but you don't know how. I couldn't speak. I didn't know what he meant, but deep down, I felt it. I had been hoping, praying, that there was some way out. That I could undo the pain, the guilt that had driven me here in the first place. But the more I stood there, looking at him, the more I understood that there was no escaping this place. No way to undo the damage. No way to fix anything. He tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with something dark, something knowing. You think the ringmaster holds all the cards, don't you? Jax chuckled, a sound like a rattlesnake's rattle. But he's not the only one who controls things here. I know things that even he doesn't. You think he's the puppet master, pulling all the strings. But there's a game being played here, Theo, a game you didn't even know you were part of. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. A game? I didn't understand. How could this be a game? The lives of everyone trapped in this hellish carnival weren't some twisted play. They were real. Their suffering, their pain, their endless performances were all real. Cassie's curse had been real. It was all too real. What game? I asked, my voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. Jax's smile twisted even further, if that was possible. He stepped closer, the sharp scent of him, sweat and something else I couldn't quite place, making me want to recoil. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, caught in the spell he was weaving around me. The ringmaster isn't the only one with power in this place, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He may think he controls the carnival, but there are others who play by different rules. My rules. He grinned wider, that grotesque, twisted smile stretching across his face. You're a pawn, Theo, just like all the rest of us. But what if I told you there was a way out? A way to break the rules, a way to escape. You just have to play. I felt the weight of his words sink in. I had been so focused on the ringmaster, so consumed with trying to understand the rules of this place, that I hadn't considered the possibility that there was someone, something, else controlling it all. Jax, the trickster, the chaos. He was the one pulling the strings behind the curtain. But even as my mind raced with this new, horrifying possibility, fear gripped me. What happens if I lose? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. My throat was dry, the weight of my own terror choking me. Jax's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but then it returned, more wicked than before. Oh, Theo, he said, his voice dripping with dark amusement. "You're already losing. The question is, how much are you willing to lose before the game is over?" His words sank in like knives. I wasn't sure what kind of game he meant, or what it would cost me, but something deep inside told me that there was no winning here. Not unless I played by his rules. And as much as I wanted to fight back, to run from this twisted nightmare, I knew, deep down, that I had already crossed a point of no return. Jack stepped back, his body moving in a blur of color and motion. Before I could even react, he disappeared into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as he had come, leaving me standing there, alone and breathless. I didn't know what to do anymore. The carnival wasn't just a trap, it was a game. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't the player here. I was the prey. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure if I wanted to escape anymore. Because Jax had planted a seed in my mind, a seed of doubt, a seed of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could beat the game. But how far was I willing to fall to find out? The carnival felt different now. The air crackled with something more than just the distorted music and flickering lights. It was as if the entire place had been holding its breath, waiting for something, or perhaps someone, to shatter the illusion of control the ringmaster had built so carefully over the years. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, the tension, the unease, like the carnival was about to erupt. I wasn't alone anymore. At first, I had thought I was the only one who had seen through the carnival's twisted glamour. The others were trapped in their endless performances, but not me. Not anymore. But now, as I walked deeper into the maze of tents and twisted paths, I realized that I wasn't the only one who had begun to understand. Cassie was the first to find me, standing in the flickering shadows near the entrance to the largest tent. Her face, still pale, still haunting, looked almost the same as it had when I first saw her. But there was something new in her eyes. Something I hadn't seen before. It wasn't the hollow, broken look of someone who had given up. It was something else. Something alive. She caught my eye the moment I stepped into view. There was no hesitation, no fear in her gaze. Only a quiet, determined kind of understanding. I took a step toward her, unable to pull my eyes away. "You're not alone," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight of meaning that settled into my chest. She didn't need to say more. Her eyes told the rest. She wasn't just another soul trapped in the carnival anymore. She had seen it, the truth. And now, she was awake. I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. I thought I had come here to find redemption, to find some way to escape the crushing weight of my past. But now, standing in front of Cassie, I realized something. The redemption I sought wasn't something I would find alone. I wasn't the only one who had been broken by the world. We were all broken. I stepped closer to her, my heart pounding in my chest. "What happened to you?" The words were heavy, like stones in my mouth. Cassie gave a faint smile, but there was no joy in it. "I made a wish," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A wish for freedom." She looked down at the ground, the weight of the truth sinking in. But that's not the way it works here. The carnival feeds on us. It needs us. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. It all clicked in that moment. This place, this cursed carnival, wasn't just a trap for souls. It was a parasite, feeding off of the performers, sucking the very essence of life from us, twisting our desires into fuel for its own growth. I was beginning to understand. The fire breather stepped out of the shadows next. His movements were slow, deliberate, and there was something unsettling in the way he moved toward us, like he had been waiting. The flames around him flickered, casting long, grotesque shadows on the tent walls. His face was painted with the same hollow look as the others, but there was a spark in his eyes, a hint of rebellion. "We've been here too long," he said, his voice rough, like he hadn't spoken in years. "The ringmaster, the carnival, it's all a lie, a game we're forced to play. But what if we stopped playing?" I could barely breathe. His words resonated with me, with all of us. It was like something inside of me, something that had been buried under layers of fear and hopelessness, was suddenly awakened. I wasn't alone anymore. We weren't alone anymore. Cassie nodded, her gaze never leaving the fire breather. "We can't just stand here and wait for it to consume us. We have to fight back. Together." The air in the carnival shifted. It wasn't just the three of us anymore. One by one, the other performers emerged from the shadows. The contortionist, her body still twisted from years of impossible routines, stepped forward, her eyes sharp and knowing. The clowns, their painted smiles now replaced with something darker, more determined. They all stood together, united in a single, silent resolve. It wasn't just a few of us. It was all of us. "We're done being puppets," the fire breather growled. "We've been feeding this place for far too long. It's time to starve it." It was like a spark had lit a fire in all of us. The moment we stood together, the moment we realized we weren't the only ones seeing the truth, something shifted in the air. It was as though the carnival itself was beginning to notice. The ground beneath our feet trembled. The lights above flickered erratically, and the twisted music grew louder, more chaotic, as if the carnival was fighting to keep us in line. But we didn't back down. "We tear it down," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I expected. "We don't just escape it, we destroy it, all of it. The ringmaster, the lies, the curse, it all ends tonight." Cassie stepped forward, her eyes blazing with something fierce, something strong. "Together, we break free. Together, we make it end." I could feel it now, the power that surged through all of us. The shared understanding, the shared pain, the shared desire to be free. For the first time since I had entered this nightmare, I realized that the power wasn't just in me. It was in all of us. Every single soul who had been trapped here. Without another word, we moved. The performers, our newfound allies, took their places. The fire breathers lit their flames, not for the carnival's show, but for war. The acrobats flew through the air, no longer bound by the ringmaster's commands, but by the will to be free. The clowns, once painted with grotesque smiles, now stood tall, their laughter no longer a mockery, but a battle cry. Together we stood united, ready to tear down the very thing that had held us captive for so long. The ground trembled again, louder this time. The carnival seemed to groan in protest, the air thick with the scent of burning desire, of freedom finally igniting. And as the first flames leapt into the sky, fueled by our fury, our pain, and our rebellion, the ringmaster's voice boomed across the carnival. But it was too late. We had already begun. The carnival was burning, its heart consumed by the flames we had set. The ringmaster's reign of terror was coming to an end. The performers were no longer his puppets. We were free. And as the flames devoured the carnival around us, I knew, with every fiber of my being, that there would be no going back. The rebellion had begun, and with it, the end of the carnival. The flames came to life like a beast unleashed, their ravenous hunger burning through the very fabric of the carnival. The night had turned from dark to something else, something unrecognizable, as the fire swallowed everything in its path. The tents, those towering, oppressive structures that had once felt like a cage, crackled and screamed as the flames tore through them. They were like paper, like dry wood, collapsing under the weight of the heat, as if the very bones of the carnival were being burned away. I stood in the center of it all, watching, feeling the heat lick at my skin. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came in ragged gasps, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the inferno. It was as though the world had shifted, as though this place, the carnival, had finally begun to unravel, its life force drained by the very fire it had once been built to contain. The fire wasn't just consuming the carnival, it was consuming everything. Every twisted memory, every broken soul that had been part of it. The performers, the audience, the shadows. It was all turning to ash. And yet, even as the flames tore through the world around me, there was something else in the air. A pressure, a force pushing against the flames. A voice, like an iron chain, cutting through the roar of the fire, mocking me. "You think this will destroy me?" The ringmaster's voice echoed, somehow louder than the crackling flames. It was everywhere, reverberating through the very ground beneath my feet. "You think you can end what's been bound for centuries?" His laughter followed, twisted and cruel, rising above the chaos like a song sung by the damned. The fire flickered, as though hesitating in the face of his words. The flames seemed to falter, the heat momentarily abating. It felt like the carnival itself was pushing back, its own life force fighting against the destruction we had brought upon it. And then, in the midst of it, I saw her. Cassie. She stepped forward, her body covered in soot, the heat from the flames licking at her skin, but she didn't flinch. She was no longer the broken, hollow shell I had seen earlier. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was something else. She was free. Her eyes were burning with a fire of their own, and when she spoke, it wasn't in fear, it wasn't even in anger. It was something more powerful than that. It was defiance. "It's over," she said, her voice cutting through the madness like a blade. She raised her hand, and the fire responded. The flames grew higher, fiercer, as if they were dancing to her will. The inferno roared to life, swirling around us, its orange glow blinding. The carnival was fighting, struggling to hold on, but Cassie, we, had already won. The ringmaster's grip on us was slipping, and in that moment I knew that there was no turning back. We had freed ourselves. The only thing left was to watch the carnival burn. The ringmaster's voice cracked, raw with fury. "You cannot defeat me," he howled. "I am this place. I control everything. You cannot escape me."